Hi, this is Linda with What Are Your Wishes, and today I have a Playdate invite set for my nephew featuring a few Lawn Fawn stamp sets. We have Fantastic Friends, Life is Good, and Dana, which is a small stamp set at a really good price point. Today we will be using some Bristol Smooth because I'm going to be ink smooshing and blending, and then I'm going to be stenciling with it as well. And the finished cards will be on Nina Solar White 110 pound cardstock portrait side folding cards. We will also be using Distress Oxides in Squeezed Lemonade, Mermaid Lagoon, Salty Ocean, and Black Soot. Now here I've just put down some Salty Ocean and some Mermaid Lagoon, and I don't want this to be really dark, but I want a lot of texture. So as you can see, I'm going into those tiny little beaded bits and drying in between, and I do this a couple of times. And by the end of this card making session, my fingers are covered in ink. But unlike Christina Warner and a couple of other card makers, I really don't care. They've got lovely nails, and I wish I had the patience to upkeep my nails like that, but I just don't. So, yeah, inky fingers. Okay, so now I'm adhering the stencil to the back of one of the panels. I'm doing 3 cards, but I'm only showing you mainly one panel for each step. And here I'm using Mermaid Lagoon up the top. This is the wave stencil from Simon Says Stamp, if I didn't say that earlier. And then I'm using Salty Ocean towards the bottom, a little bit of Squeezed Lemonade up the top to give that light shining through the water effect, and a little bit of Black Soot down the bottom just to darken it up. Now, what I didn't show at the beginning was I do actually use a little bit of craft cardstock for the bottom piece. Here I'm just getting rid of that white. I'm ink blending over it so that it's not as bright with Mermaid Lagoon and Salty Ocean. And now here's a generic stencil that I can't remember where I got it, and I've taped off so that I can just get a couple of those little circles and put a little bit of glimmer paste through them so they look like shiny little bubbles in the ocean. You can already see my fingers are well and truly covered in ink. And I was actually pushing it by trying to do all 3 cards at once without washing the stencil in between. So if you were doing large areas and you were working with it for a very long time, I would definitely suggest washing your tools, your stencil in between each card. But because I was working rather quickly with it, though not as quick as this is actually sped up quite a bit. Because I was working rather quickly with it, I wasn't pushing it too much. But if I was doing full backgrounds with a lot of that glimmer paste, I would probably clean off between each card. And when you are finished, you want to clean everything down straight away. As I've said before, this stuff sets like concrete, and once it's set, you will not get it off. Couple of last bubbles, set them aside to dry, and then I get on with the stamping after I've cleaned up everything well and truly. getting the majority of it off before I go and clean the stencil in the sink. Okay, so because there are certain images I'm definitely going to have on each card, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to arrange them in a quarter of the cardstock. So what I can do is, without moving the stamps, I can stamp them 3 times. And the way I achieve that is I put them in a quarter of the section on the paper in my MISTI, get them onto the MISTI door, stamp them once, rotate my cardstock, stamp them again, and then I will flip my cardstock over. Now, there is one image that was a little bit too close, and I'll show you that in a moment once I've stamped them. So what I did was I just took that one little image and I stamped it again off an acrylic block onto the cardstock, so I could cut them into 4 and then just colour them each little quarter independently. So I'm stamping with Memento Tuxedo Black ink because I plan on Copic colouring. And these images are all going to be definites on the cards, on each card. There are some other fish that I wasn't quite sure what I was going to use and what I wasn't going to use, so I stamped a whole lot of other fish, and I'll show you that in a moment as well. And here we go, flipping the cardstock over. Stamping this a 3rd time. And as you can see, barely through the cardstock, it's a little bit close. So I'm going to stamp it just in a little bit closer on one side, and where it's got 2, I'll actually just slice through that one that was already stamped, so it doesn't impact on the die cutting of the one on the other side. Now, here is my trick for stamping multiple things for multiple cards. If you don't know how many you're going to need to fill in a scene, stamp them all. If you've got a MISTI, stamp them all in the middle of your cardstock. That way you can put them all in a line and you can move your cardstock up and down and just restamp, 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 and you end up with tons of images to colour, but you can do them all in a line, which makes it really easy and quick, and you don't have to move everything too far, you don't have to move your stamps. It's just so easy to stamp them out and get them done really quickly, stamping and colouring. So you'll see what I mean here in a minute. Stamp them down, adjust the cardstock a little bit, double check to make sure that it's in the right position, ink, and stamp down again, and then repeat the process. Now, here are those pieces of craft cardstock I didn't show earlier that I cut down with a little hilly border die, a generic one. And I'm inking them up with some Vintage Photo Distress ink, not oxide. So that will go over the bottom black soot portion of the card. And I just needed an ocean bottom to ground the scenes. So that's why they came in. Because I had the crab and I had the seaweed and the coral, and they all needed something to sit on. So I hadn't thought of that when I was planning out the card. But it's quite normal for cards to be a work in progress. Even if you have a plan and you think you know how your card's going to look, it can always change up. Now I'm just putting that on all the cards. And I'm sorry some of this is out of frame. Until you actually start video recording yourself making cards, you really don't understand how difficult it is to keep everything in frame all the time. Hats off to people that manage to do it on a daily basis. Okay, now I'm planning out where the coral and the crab and the seaweed and everything's going to go. And I end up adhering everything with multi-matte medium, except for there's the shark and there's a little fish that I have trailing underneath the shark. And the idea for that, there's these little fish and I don't know what they're called, and the sharks don't eat them because they clean the sharks. The sharks will swim past them on the reefs and they'll actually go and clean in their gills and everything, and the sharks leave them alone. So that's what that little grey fish was intended to be, one of those, whatever they're called. So now I quickly adhere everything down. And though my multi-matte medium bottle isn't clogged, it does clog sometimes, but only because of user error. If I forget to sort of squeeze the last little bit out before I close it up after a card making session. I just find it's easier to grab it with all my fingers in my fist to get the glue out. Definitely not delicate with it at all. Simply because the precision tip creates a fair bit of resistance because it is a precision tip. But I do the same with my thick tacky glue because that's really thick and it's really hard to get out of that container sometimes. But it's something that's really good for a quick stick that you've got just a little bit of wiggle room with. Unlike the multi-matte medium, you've got a little bit more wiggle room with that. And the reason I'm using it for this is because I'm stamping stuff on distress oxides, and the tacky glue sort of dries glossy. So if some of it comes out here with the multi-matte medium, it will dry matte and it won't be as visible. So now that's all the fish down that are going to be flat on the card. Now I'm going to stamp the Dana sentiment. Now, for the sentiments, I'm using parts out of the Dana set, and I'm also using an alphabet stamp set called Jessie's Letters, or Jessie's Alphabet from Lawn Fawn. And if you haven't invested in some form of alphabet stamp set, they're really good. You can, if you're stuck for a sentiment and you don't have one in your stock, you can just make one up. And I have these, which are sort of childlike and playlike. As you can see here, I almost stamped down a bee. That would have been a disaster. And it was just luck that it didn't stamp down properly. So getting back to what I was saying, you can just create your own sentiment. And this one's playful and childlike, and I've got scripty ones that are a lot more elegant. But they're invaluable in your crafty stampy stash. So now I'm popping up the sharks and the little fish just behind the shark on foam tape. And then I'm going to adhere those to the card bases, which again are Nina 110 portrait style side folding cards. And I'm going to do that with some low profile foam tape. I find that I gravitate towards side folding cards simply because where I live, which is Australia, by the way, if you didn't get the accent, I don't think I've ever seen or received a top folding card. So to me, greeting cards are just side folding. Not that I have never done a top folding card, it's just I gravitate towards side folding. So here we are sticking the card panel to the card base, and it always takes me a couple of goes to get the card panel adhered to, especially the first one if I'm doing a set. But there it is. Now there's a little smudge on the sentiment on the inside of the card I show you, but I have a go at that with an emery board later, as I don't have a sand eraser, and it just works just as good. And here are the pictures. I hope you had fun watching me create these cards with my inky fingers, and if you did like it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and don't forget, have fun crafting your imagination. Bye!